we all have ears to hear this word and a heart that understands, Lord. Lord, I just pray that he be able to listen to your voice and just speak out what you're telling him, Lord God, and just be with him. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Father God, would you just speak your words and let them find ready ground. Yeah, I just want to submit to you, Lord. Help me submit to you. And speak in the fear of your name, which is wisdom and good. Amen. So the main gist of what I'm going to share tonight is something that the Lord gave me a couple months ago, and it was pretty powerful and absolutely necessary in my life at that time, and I've been kind of waiting to release it for a while. Kept thinking, oh, is this something that I need to like write up and deliver out via Facebook, and kept not, and then a week ago or so, yeah, I think it was a week ago or so, suddenly I felt like he said, okay, this is the night to do it. But before I start talking about that, I want to just put out there into everybody's hearts a reminder that everything we hear from somebody else is an appetizer for us to go get the meal with the Lord, to sit down at his table and eat with him. That we shouldn't be accepting anything from any man and just going, oh, that must be the way it is. Yeah. We have to listen to the witness of the Spirit inside us and go into his word and take it into a conversation with him. It all should be that way. I think that's vital. One of the reasons I talk about that is because I think, I don't know, it feels like every time I'm talking, I'm always talking to people who know things so well and more than I do, and it's always there's a certain amount of like, this is it, Lord, why are you giving me messages to people who already know it really inside and out? But I'm feeling it so deep right now at this time. There are so many prophetic voices or identified as prophetic voices going on right now. And it's easy to accept them as prophetic voices because other people are accepting them as prophetic voices and because they have prophetic tags on them. And teaching, the same thing, doesn't have a label of prophetic on it, but teachers, apostles, all these names we put on things to say, this is legit, but it's just another person who's decided it's legit. Mm-hmm. So just an encouragement to take all of this into conversation, take all of this into the Word, and listen to the Holy Spirit that's resident inside you as a believer. So that was the first mini not message. Okay, the other. Was I wanted to share a testimony of earlier this week, which goes right along with we were. Got a little, I'm a fan club right here. Yes, awesome. My number one fan. A testimony of God's goodness and the efficacy of like pressing into Him on things that has to do with offense and that, like the fasting earlier this week, and I have I don't want to get too specific, but a relationship with somebody that is not here. So to settle that right now. That is not part of this congregation, or, yeah. And it is a person who has a lot of fear and a lot of need to control things. And that control's often being directed my way. And I naturally, in myself, I have a weakness to respond to that kind of thing. And to go, I have to like make this better and make things good for this, make this person happy. And I have spent too much time trying to make people happy who are determined to be unhappy. And I fall into that really easily. A lot of people do, but I have conversations in my head with people who are unhappy with me, and it becomes this thing where I'm like having a conversation with them over and over and over and over and over and over again throughout a day. And at some point the Lord said, you're inviting a spirit in the name of that person into your life and letting that spirit harass you. It's basically as a spirit that's sort of a carbon copy of that person that you've befriended in a horrible way. So I started telling it to leave. And when I started having the conversation, I'm like, no, I'm not going to have a conversation with, phantom person you. And, and started casting it out as if it was a actual spirit, which was awesome. And really just pressing into the Lord for deliverance from that need to make people happy who are not interested in being happy. And later this week, after the fast was done, I got some just awesome breakthrough of when the person came at me again with a sort of, this bugs me and this da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I was able to just sort of sit there and go, I'm sorry about that. And just drop it, leave it at the end of the conversation and move on and go, that was not a complaint, that was a legitimate complaint against me, and I'm okay with that, and it's done. And it was awesome. It was such an amazing feeling, praise the Lord, to go, okay, yeah, that's nice, thank you, and move on past that. So, anyway, a testimony of breakthrough. Actually, which ties into, in prayer earlier this week, here in the early morning, of really just getting a sense of offense as something that we think we don't want offense. We want to get rid of offense. And the Lord talking about that's actually not true. That offense in and of itself is not a bad thing. That it's basically pain of the soul. It's heart pain. And where it becomes really bad is how we deal with it. That, it's that thing that we don't want all pain to go away. Having no ability to feel pain is a terrible, terrible thing for your physical body. And having no ability to feel those stabs of pain in your heart is a terrible, terrible thing for your heart. Amen. It means a hard heart. We want to be able to go, ouch, I feel offense, and then how we take that to the Lord and deal with what the root cause of that is in us is a wonderful thing. And think about, he actually called himself, it's Jesus was an intentional rock of offense laid before, and it wasn't because it wasn't a negative thing. It was you're going to come up against this and you're going to stumble on this because otherwise you're going to keep going in the way you're going, and I love you too much for that. So I'm going to put something in your way. The Father is going to send His Son to be an offense so that you can be delivered, so you can find out that you were headed in the wrong direction to start with. So that's just a little sort of lesson that I got dropped in the middle of prayer, as we've all been talking about offense and praying about offense and fasting about offense, to not despise the offense and wanting to get rid of it as quickly as possible and go, there must be, I'm having offense I must be bad, get rid of it. It's better to go, wait a minute, let me get into it and take it to the Lord and go, what is this offense? Where's it coming from? What's in my heart that's causing it? Or even what's off in a relationship that's causing it, that somebody's causing me to be offended. So that was not my message number 2. Maybe these are things I should have typed out and sent them out anyway. Into the world. It's kind of cool having this streaming because a lot of times, when I was talking about earlier how a lot of times I feel like I'm talking to, it's the preaching to the choir thing, talking to people who already know this stuff and already have it in their hearts. And I've often thought, sometimes some of this stuff just needs to be said out into the atmosphere even though we know it, which actually ties into something later. So I guess I am getting to the, the real thing now. So I've often thought, talking to people who, I know these people know, I know you all know this stuff, is that it's also important to just preach it out into the air and say it, because a lot of times things that everybody knows don't get said, and I think there's something that is let to continue because nobody's saying anything that everybody knows. But it's kind of cool having a live stream, because then I can imagine it's also going up to somebody who has no idea what I'm talking about. It's going, whoa! So. Or maybe will, come across to record it down the road, I don't know. Anyway. Just random pictures into my head that you probably didn't need. So, Jonathan, the son of Saul. It's all right. So, a little while back, a couple months ago, the Lord started talking to Stephanie about Jonathan, and I sort of knew some stories about Jonathan, but I sat down and went, you know what? I'm going to go through and read every section there is on Jonathan. There aren't actually that very many. Would anybody mind grabbing the whiteboard and I think. The dry erase markers are in their little closet, sitting there. Thanks. You're going to bring it up, and I'm not going to use it, but we'll see.
You're not going to use it?
I don't know, we'll see. I think so. I've got it. I kept thinking I was going to use it, so I'm going to try to use it. Jonathan, the Lord was talking to us about Jonathan, and so I started studying his life, or what we know of his life. So I read through all of Jonathan, everything that has to do with Jonathan all the way through, and we talk a lot about David, obviously, and then because of that we talk a lot about Saul, and there's a little bit of kind of what is, Jonathan was, really faithful, and he had this great friendship with David, was kind of, thank you very much, kind of what I knew. Oh, it's already open. So, I'm not going to jump around much, because it's all about 1 Samuel. So we're going to hit some highlights from 1 Samuel. So mostly this is about Jonathan, but it's kind of hard to get Jonathan without the context of David and Saul. So we're going to talk a little bit about them. I wrote down a topic about, just a second, let me make sure before I tell you that it's actually true. Yeah, let's go to 1 Samuel 8. So I remember thinking, how you kind of have these sort of good guys and bad guys divided in your head from Scripture? It's like, I don't know, we have these sort of, the stories of them, and we sort of take, this was a good person, this was a bad person. Even though, obviously, everybody who was a good person had a failing down the road. You kind of think of Jonathan as a good guy, right? Which was, so that was just another thing I had in my head before I started really going, let me read everything there is about Jonathan. Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Those were their names. His sons didn't walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. Then all of the elders gathered together and came to Samuel and said to him, "Look, you're old, your sons don't walk in your ways. Make us a king and judge us like all the nations." Which I thought was kind of fascinating going back, because I've read this section about the Israelites asking for a king before, and sort of glossed over the fact that Samuel, another good guy, had set up his corrupt sons to judge Israel, which is kind of weird because, well, he was a prophet, he heard from the Lord. It doesn't really say why he set up his corrupt sons to judge Israel, other than that he was old and it was, hard for him to do at this point. And judges didn't rule by descent. The judges were raised up by God. That's why asking for a king was not such a great idea, because for a long time the Israelites had been judged by judges that the Lord put his Spirit on, highlighted them. This is a judge who's moving in the wisdom and the Spirit of the Lord, and then another judge would be raised up. They didn't pass it down to their kids like kings do, which I thought was fascinating. That this whole king thing, which we tend to, I mean, it says right there as you go in through the rest of the chapter there, that first Samuel's bummed. He's like, what? They want a king. This is a horrible thing. And then God's like, no, it's not that they're rejecting you, it's that they're rejecting me. And then he tells them, I'm going to give them a king. You tell them how terrible it's going to be to have a king, and then I'll give it to them. But I think it's interesting that Samuel had this sort of king impulse in himself, that he had ruled as a judge over Israel and had decided, yeah, why don't my sons do it? Just to point out the point that there is, one of the good guys is complicit in what's going on here. The people are coming and asking, we need a better leader. Now they're choosing a king instead of going, this is, your sons are not judging rightly. Where is the judge that should be judging us? They're going, we need a king so that we can be like the rest of the nations. But they're doing it out of a right impulse. I mean, not out of a right impulse, but out of a good reason. They're being judged by corrupt judges. So just tagging onto that. So they insist on having a king, and then we're going to fast forward a little bit to chapter 9. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zerah, son of all these people, mighty man of power. He had a choice and handsome son whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Which is just to point out, let's use the whiteboard. Yeah. Scrawly writing there. Funny thing is, the name Saul means asked for. Like, going along with that sort of blow your mind kind of, I love names in Scripture, that at some point, Saul's father called him asked for, and God knew that down the road, he was going to fit hey, these are people that, this is what the people of Israel asked for, and I gave them so that they could see that it's a terrible idea. Which is kind of cool. So, just that sort of the foreknowledge of how God plans things and allows history to serve his purposes and reveal him to be in charge. But Saul is good looking. He's He's everything everybody would want in a king. He's attractive, and he's strong, and he's taller than every other Israelite by a whole head. His shoulders above their head. The bunny trails. Okay. But it's interesting, tagging back. No, never mind. Sorry. Moving on. We're going to see, even though Saul was attractive in everything that you would think would be great in a king, a celebrity, that he wasn't all of that. So 1 Samuel 13. Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul and Mishmash in the mountains of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people he sent away, every man to his tent. Jonathan attacked the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. Then Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." Now all Israel heard it, said that Saul had attacked a garrison of the Philistines, and that Israel had also become an abomination to the Philistines. And the people were called together to Saul at Gilgal. Then the Philistines gathered together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude, and they came up and encamped in Michmash, to the east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in danger, for the people were distressed, then the people hid in caves and thickets and rocks and holes and in pits. And some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. Then he waited 7 days according to the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So, the people are going, what's going on? The thing that's supposed to be happening is not happening. We're waiting for Samuel. So they start leaving. And of course that gets into Saul, and he starts going, wait a minute, what's going on? Something needs to be happening. Impatience sets in. Which is going to tie back to the people of Israel wanting a king. They've got leaders over them who are abusing them. And rather than going, okay, Lord, we need you to set up somebody else, we need you to raise up another judge, they get impatient and go, we've got this great idea. The other nations of the world, they have kings. If we had a king, it'd be better for us. Yeah, sure. Yes, it's true. So Saul said, bring a burnt offering and peace offering here to me, and he offered the burnt offering, which sounds kind of cool. It sounds like, he's acknowledging God, right? He's making a burnt offering. Except the prophet of God had already said, wait for me, and I will come. Now it happened as soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might greet him. And Samuel said, what have you done? Saul said, when I saw that people were scattered from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, then I said, the Philistines will now come down on me at Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you've done foolishly. You've not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Which is to show that it's not just evil that displeases the Lord, but also good intentions apart from him. It's the knowledge of the tree, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The good and the evil are both displeasing, both fall short. Which I think is really pertinent right into this hour, right now where we're at. Because right now, hitting on both of these, the church is looking around and going, we have evil leaders. Lord, why do we have evil leaders? We need to fix this problem of evil leaders. And we're going to do a good thing. We're going to do a good thing for God by fixing the problem of the evil leaders. But the question becomes, what is the Lord saying? Okay. First Samuel 14. Skipping on. Now it happened one day that Jonathan, the son of Saul, sorry, we got to Jonathan. He was mentioned earlier, so. Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man who bore his armor, "Come, let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that's on the other side." But he did not tell his father. And Saul was sitting in the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron. I need to study out the trees. All through 1 Samuel, for some reason, whenever people are identified where they are, they're under a specific kind of tree. I just put that out there because I think it's really cool, and there must be something there because I don't know why. Anyway, it's one of those things like he's under a pomegranate tree, and later he's under a different kind of tree, a tamarisk tree, and that's kind of random, but I thought that was kind of cool. It's like this is a little something to pull on, a thread to pull on with the Lord and take to him in conversation. Under the pomegranate tree, which is in Migron, the people who were with him were about 600 men. Ahijah the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, was wearing an ephod. But the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. Between the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other side. And the name of one was Bozez, and the name of the other Senah. I think that's sharp and shining, the names of the two rocks. The front of the one faced northward opposite Mishmash, and the other southward opposite Gibeah. Then Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few." So this is an interesting contrast. Let's see. Let's put up here. So I didn't bring any notes, so I guess this is going to have to suffice. Following my wife's example and going unconventional notes. You take a picture of it at the end of the notes. So Saul, inspired by fear, is doing things the Lord never told him to do. He's actually going against what the Lord told him to do and hoping that he can come up with something pleasing to the Lord that's against what the Lord said to do. As opposed to Jonathan is going out in faith of, hey, you know what? God can take care of this. Let's go see what he's going to do. What we're going to do is rack up a lot of good stuff for Jonathan here. So like a scorecard here for now. Let us go over the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few. This is also in stark contrast to exactly what Saul was saying earlier. Everybody's left me. I don't have any people left anymore. There's so few of us that they're going to come down and just destroy me. Whereas Jonathan, his son, is going, hey, you know what? There's just a few of us. Let's go see what the Lord can do with just a few people. So his armor bearer said to him, "Do all that's in your heart. Go then, here I'm with you according to your heart." And Jonathan said, "Very well, let us cross over these men, and we will show ourselves to them." And he puts out for the Lord. He asks the Lord for a sign. If they say to us, "Wait until we come to you," then we'll stand in our place and not go up to them. But if they say, "Come up to us," then we'll go. For the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this will be a sign to us. So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, Look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they've hidden. Then the men of the garrison called to Jonathan and his armor-bearer and said, Come up to us, and we'll show you something. Very clever. This neat thing. So Jonathan said, Hey, this is the sign we were asking for. Come after me, for the Lord has delivered them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor-bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, and as he came after him, his armor-bearer killed them. The first slaughter with Jonathan and his armor-bearer made was about 20 men with about half an acre of land, and there was trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and the raiders also trembled, and the earth quaked so that it was a very great trembling. Now the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and there was the multitude melting away, and they went here and there. Then Saul said to the people who were with him, Now call the roll and see who is gone from us. And when they had called the roll, surprisingly, Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. And Saul said to this guy, Bring the ark of God here, for at that time the ark of God was with the children of Israel. Now it happened while Saul talked to the priest, that the noise which was in the camp of the Philistines continued to increase. So Saul said to the priest, Withdraw your hand. Then Saul and all the people who were with him assembled, and they went to the battle. Indeed, every man's sword was against his neighbor, and there was a very great confusion. Moreover, the Hebrews who were with the Philistines before that time, who went up with them into the camp from the surrounding country, they also joined the Israelites, who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, all the men of Israel who had hidden in the mountains of Ephraim, when they heard the Philistines fled, they also followed hard after them in battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle shifted to Beth-aven. I just want to point out here, because I think it's a recurring theme through, that this small action of Jonathan and his armor-bearer was an initial thrust that then encouraged others to join in, and then encouraged others until there was, again, a mighty force gathered. One of the ways the Lord works is raising up a few people who are willing to go, you know what, the Lord's good. I'm going to step out in faith with him. And then that's what increases the faith of others. And they come alongside, and soon there's a movement happening. And the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had placed the people under an oath. Cursed is the man who eats any food until evening before I've taken vengeance on my enemies. So none of the people tasted food. Again, here's another one of those, okay, so fasting, it's a good thing. Notice he doesn't actually say, let's fast and seek the Lord. He just says, let's fast. Which is a dangerous thing. Now all the people of the land came, he kind of is, he reads very impulsively. He just has these ideas and goes, let's do this thing, I know what we can do. And then later regrets it. And as we'll see a little bit later, oftentimes then starts blaming other people. And when the people had come into the woods, there was honey dripping, but no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the people with the oath. Therefore he stretched out the end of the rod that was in his hand, and dipped it in a honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his countenance brightened. Then one of the people said, Your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, Cursed is the man who eats food this day. And the people were faint. But Jonathan said, My father has troubled the land. Look now, how my countenance is brightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies, which they found. For now would there not have been a much greater slaughter among the Philistines? Now they had driven back the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon, so the people were very faint. And the people rushed on the spoil and took sheep, oxen, and calves and slaughtered them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. Then they told Saul, saying, Look, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood. So he said, You have dealt treacherously. Roll a large stone to me this day. Then Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, bring me here every man's ox and every man's sheep. Slaughter them here and eat, and do not sin against the Lord by eating with blood." So every one of the people brought his ox with him that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. This was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them until the morning light. And let us not leave a man of them." And they said, "Do whatever seems good to you." Then the priest said, let us draw near to God here." So Saul asked the council of God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel?" But he did not answer him that day. And Saul said, "Come over here, all you chiefs of the people, and know and see what this sin was today. For as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die." But not a man among all the people answered him. And he said to all Israel, "You will be on one side, and my son Jonathan and I will be on the other side." And the people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you." Therefore Saul said to the Lord God of Israel, "Give a perfect lot." So Saul and Jonathan were taken, but the people escaped. And Saul said, "Cast lots between my son Jonathan and me." So Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." And Jonathan told him and said, "I only tasted a little honey with the end of the rod that was in my hand. So now I must die." Saul answered, "Go do so, and more also, for you shall surely die, Jonathan." But the people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who has accomplished this great deliverance in Israel? Certainly not. As the Lord lives, not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. And Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. And it's fascinating in this that Saul issues this oath, sets this fast, without actually seeking the Lord about it, without having it really connected to God at all. His people are faint with hunger. They do a sin in that they fall on the meat and eat it with its blood, which was against the law. And it's Jonathan's fault because he had some honey in the wilderness. Go into that, talking about how it's in Saul's character to make rash decisions, get caught up, and start blaming other people for why it doesn't work out well. And then just to finish off sort of Saul's character as king. Also just to note, here's another bit of impatience. It's like, well, let's go ask God. First of all, he goes to the people and says, "Hey, let's do this thing, it's going to be great." And they're like, "Do it." And then the priest is like, "Maybe we should talk to God." And he's like, "Okay, we can do that." And then he doesn't hear from the Lord within a day, and it's like, oh, there must be something really wrong because God's not answering. It's back to that impatience again. So, moving forward to 1 Samuel 15. I'm reading at you a lot. I need that, I should have, anyway, prepared and had a little stool with the people sitting there, and it would have been awesome. Somebody else could have read all these sections. But it's hard because sort of to get the gist, this is really an overview kind of story through the whole story that kind of touches on Jonathan and gets where I'm going. So, thanks for hanging with me. Samuel also said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore heed the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus said the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." So Saul gathered the people together and numbered them, and telling 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. And Saul said to the Kenites, "Go, depart, get down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them, for you showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt." So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. And Saul attacked the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He also took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive. Right? He was not told to do that. And utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Okay, that was right. Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them, but everything despised and worthless that they utterly destroyed. Now the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me, and has not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried out to the Lord all night. So when Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul went to Carmel, and indeed he set up a monument for himself, and he's gone on around, passed by, and gone down to Gilgal. Samuel went to Saul and Saul said to him, Blessed are you of the Lord, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears, and the lowing of oxen which I hear? And Saul said, They've brought them from the Amalekites, from the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we've utterly destroyed. They just emphasize your there, because that's a repeated pattern of Saul as well, in that he's continually talking to the prophet. He acknowledges that God is powerful. He acknowledges that God is good and that God can give them victory. But he keeps placing the relationship with God back on the prophet, rather than the conversation that he could have. Which kind of ties back to what I was talking about right at the beginning, is a danger, danger, danger in this hour to be running around looking for other people to have that relationship with God for us, and then give us the wisdom that comes out of that relationship. Which, just to make really clear, we all know in part and prophesy in part, so there is wisdom that comes out of the congregation, and we do hear from each other and we learn from each other, but that is in addition to our personal relationship and what we receive from the Lord, not in substitution of it. Okay. Let's skip a little bit for time. Samuel says, "Has the Lord as great a delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you've rejected the word of the Lord, he's also rejected you from being king." It's the second time. And Saul acknowledges it. I've sinned. I've transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now therefore, talking to the prophet, please pardon my sin and return with me that I may worship the Lord. And he says, I'll not return with you, for you rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord's rejected you from being king over Israel. And Samuel turned to go away. Saul seized the edge of his robe and it tore. So Samuel said to him, and his heart here is revealed, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you, and also the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent, for he's not a man that he should relent. Here's where Saul's heart is truly revealed. I've sinned, yet honor me now, please, before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me that I may worship the Lord your God. He actually asks the prophet, okay, you're right, I've been cast aside by God. And rather than pressing in to that, he goes, but can we keep pretending before the people? Can I go worship God so that the people won't reject me? Which is such the danger of being set up and given some kind of title in the church, is getting to that point where being in that position and having that title becomes so important to you that when God has removed himself, all you've got left to cling to is that impression of being godly. Okay, so we're supposed to be prayer starting at 10, so I better skip some stuff.
You're good. Keep going.
Okay. So shortly after this, David is anointed, and I'm not going to read through that because it's cool but not pertinent to this idea. Right at the end of 15, no, sorry, 16:13. So there's this whole identifying of David thing that happens where they take people out of the different tribes. And then in 16:13, Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. I thought this was fascinating that this is written in this one right after the other. The Spirit of the Lord falls on David and lifts off Saul. I think that distressing spirit is a spirit of jealousy that we can see later on Saul, and goes along with the idea that the Spirit of the Lord fell on David. Saul's servant said to him, "Surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Let our master now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is a skillful player on the harp. And it shall be that he will play with his hand when the distressing spirit from God is upon you, and you shall be well." So Saul said to his servants, "Provide me now a man who can play well, and bring him to me." Then one of the servants answered and said, "Look, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him." Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son David, who is with the sheep." Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, young goats, sent them by his son David to Saul. So David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. Then Saul sent to Jesse, saying, "Please let David stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight." And so it was, whenever the Spirit from God was upon Saul, that David would take a harp and play it with his hand. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would part from him. And I'm going to skip through 17. It's like a Cliff's Notes version of 1 Samuel, focusing on Saul and Jonathan, which is kind of unusual because David's sort of the center of a lot of it. But I want to, right at the end, after David slays Goliath, I think it is fascinating that in verse 55 of chapter 17, when Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" And Abner said, "As your soul lives, O king, I don't know." So the king said, "Inquire whose son this young man is." And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" So David answered, "I'm the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." Kind of imagine him going, "The one who plays the harp for you."
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of, I kind of got hit by this just today. That later, Saul gets jealous of him because he's going out to war, and the people are singing, David's slaughtering his tens of thousands, Saul slaughtering his thousands. He's like, wait a minute, I'm the king. Why is he getting counted 10,000s and I'm only getting counted thousands? And the Lord highlighted out this trap of the leaderships in the pyramid kind of structure. There's a pyramid here. That pyramid kind of structure of that corporate, top-down leadership style is there's three relationships. When people get trapped up in this leadership sort of glory position, we either. The first thing is to dismiss people, not even see they're there because they don't seem to be on the same plane. They're the ones who, are sort of invisible. They're not noticeable. They're not splash kind of people. The next one is to see them as useful. Ribbon can go like that. So when it's like there's this person that cleans the throne when I'm not on it, kind of sort of thing that I don't even know who that is. And then there's there's somebody who's useful. This guy's and in this case, there's I feel better when there's this musician that comes, hangs out and plays his harp. But yeah, and even though it says he becomes his armor bearer, he's just sort of this guy. But then he's slaying Philistines, and it's like, these Philistines that nobody else, this giant, nobody else would take on. That's good. People aren't looking to me anymore going, why are these Philistines? Why is this guy coming out and taunting us and we haven't defeated the Philistines? And what's going on, king? Shouldn't we be defeating them? What are you going to do about this giant? And he's like, I don't know. I'm scared of the giant just like you are. But now David comes along and says, oh, here's somebody who's useful. Until they get too useful. And then there's jealousy, or that person's now a threat. Because they've started moving up. Down here, it's like, I don't even know who that is. As they're moving up the structure, this is somebody who's useful. They're keeping the pyramid in its shape, but now they're getting too close. So it's a threat to me up on top of the pyramid. Which is all to go, this is why God sets up family in his structure of things. And Lord, Father, keep us from seeing anybody as faceless or a tool or a threat. One of the things that's just bothering me in my spirit lately is some of the New Age stuff that's going around, or the self-help psychology thing that just is setting people up to see every relationship they have in these terms. Is this person, bad for me? Are they a threat to me? Well, then I better jettison them. Is this person useful? Are they teaching me the valuable lessons that they've been sent into my life to teach? It turns people into objects for our own use or misuse, instead of seeing people as relationships to love. And they're worded so well that it's so easy. The first impulse is to go, wow, that's good. So we better hit, 18. So at the end of 17, Saul's noticing him and going, whoa, who is this guy? He killed this Philistine. Now when he finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Very different relationship here. Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. This is actually part of what Samuel told the people when they said, give us a king. He said, and it's repeated all through these chapters, you make a king over you. What he's going to do is he's going to come take the best of what you have. And one of the things that's the best of what you have is the best people that you have. He's going to go through all the tribes, and he's going to go, these are the strong men. They belong to me. It's that acquisition. They're mine. They're my tools now. My possessions. And then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan took off the robe that was on him and gave it to David and his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. He is, in essence, right there handing over his princehood. I believe this is a prophetic act. It's very clear later that Jonathan knows David is the anointed king of Israel. And he's taking off that robe and he's taking off that armor of office. I'm the heir to the king, and placing it on David. And doing it out of love. It's such a counter to what his father's doing. This is beautiful, lifting up and acknowledging, you're the anointed one of the Lord. Okay. 18:6. Now it happened as they were coming home when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Saul was very angry, saying displeased him, and he said, they've ascribed to David 10,000s, to me they've ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? For Samuel has already told him his kingdom's been taken away. So Saul eyed David from that day forward, and it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand, as at other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall, but David escaped his presence twice. And Saul was afraid of David. So there's the completion of those three relationships, when the identity of that leader is, I'm at the top of this pyramid. Okay. Just going to hit on real quickly, in 1 Samuel 19, Jonathan warns David ahead of time that his father's against him. And then, skipping to 1 Samuel 20. David fled from Naioth and Ramah and went and said to Jonathan, what have I done? What's my iniquity and what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life? So Jonathan said to him, by no means, you shall not die. Indeed, my father will do nothing either great or small without first telling me, and why should my father hide this thing from me? It's not so. I think we're starting to see something in Jonathan there. He is very faithful and loyal, but he has a loyalty to his father too that's blinding him. We've already twice has Saul thrown a spear at David, and Jonathan's like, no, it can't be really that bad. It can't mean that he really wants to kill you. And David took an oath and said, your father certainly knows that I found favor in your eyes. And he said, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. So Jonathan said to David, whatever you yourself desire, I will do it for you. And David said to Jonathan, indeed, tomorrow's the new moon. And I should not fail to sit with the king to eat, but let me go, that I may hide in the field until the third day of evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked permission of me, that he might run over to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. If he says thus, it's well, your servant will be safe. But if he's very angry, be sure that evil is determined by him. Therefore you shall deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. Nevertheless, if there's iniquity in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father? But Jonathan said, far be it from you, for I knew certainly that evil was determined by your father to come upon you, then would I not tell you? And David said to Jonathan, who will tell me, or what if your father answers you roughly? And Jonathan said to David, come, let us go out into the field. So both of them went into the field. And then Jonathan said, the Lord God of Israel is witness. When I have sounded out my father sometime tomorrow, or the third day, and indeed there's a good toward David, and I do not send to you and tell you, may the Lord do so and much more to Jonathan. But if it pleases my father to do you evil, then I will report it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. And the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. And you shall not only show me the kindness of the Lord while I still live, that I may not die, but you shall not cut off your kindness from my house forever, no. Not when the Lord has cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, let the Lord require the hand of David's enemies. Now Jonathan again caused David to vow, because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to David, tomorrow's the new moon, you'll be missed, because your seat will be empty. And when you've stayed 3 days, go down quickly and come to the place where you hid on the day of the deed, and remain by the stone at Ezel. Then I'll shoot 3 arrows to the side, as though I shot at a target. And then I will send the lad, saying, go find the arrows. If I expressly say to the lad, look, the arrows are on this side of you, get them and come. And then as the Lord lives, there is safety for you and no harm. But if I say thus to the young man, look, the arrows are beyond you, go your way, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter which you and I have spoken, indeed the Lord be between you and me forever. Then David hid in the field, and when the new moon had come, the king sat down to eat the feast. Now the king sat on his seat, and as at other times, on a seat by the wall, and Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him, he is unclean, surely he's unclean. And it happened the next day, the second day of the month, that David's place was empty, and Saul said to Jonathan his son, why has the son of Jesse not come to eat either yesterday or today? So Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked permission of me to go to Bethlehem. And he said, please let me go, for our family has a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. And now if I found favor in your eyes, please let me get away and see my brothers. Therefore he has not come to the king's table. And Saul's anger was aroused against Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, you shall not be established, nor your kingdom. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. So again, Saul, his head is in the power. It's the kingdom's being taken away from me. You're not going to have a kingdom. And Jonathan answered Saul, his father, and said, why should he be killed? What has he done? And Saul cast a spear at him to kill him, by which Jonathan knew that it was determined by his father to kill David. And sometimes that's what it takes. He doesn't believe it of David until it's directed at him. And it's a terrible image of Saul, that he would be so driven by this anger and jealousy that he would not only throw the spear at David, but would throw it at his own son, who's he named given of God. What Jonathan means, God's gift. And so Jonathan goes out into the field and he does the whole thing with the arrows. And it's clear that Saul wants to kill David. And then he sends his servant away. And as soon as the lad had gone, David arose, this is 41, David arose from a place toward the south, fell on his face to the ground, bowed down 3 times, they kissed and wept together, but David more so. Then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, as we both swore in the name of the Lord, saying, may the Lord be between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever. So he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. So in 21, David leaves and he ends up going and eating this, where he goes, ends up going and eating the showbread, and is given it by the priest of the Lord. In 22, he departs from there, escapes to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. So he became captain over him, and there was about 400 men with him. It's interesting that the kingdom is being established by those who are discontented in the previous kingdom. The ones who have seen who Saul is, who know that the glory has left, they're the first ones to go out and take up with David in a cave in the wilderness. And in a sense, right here, the kingdom is being established. Even though David's not sitting on the throne yet, he's not being acknowledged by all the people of Israel. He now has a core of people around him who know he's the anointed one of God and are ready to go out and hang with him in a cave. Not only hang with him in a cave, but to act like they're the army of Israel. There's this discontented band in a cave are going to go raiding Philistines, which seems like such a weird thing to go, okay, we're all discontented with the king, we're going to go hide out in a cave with the guy we know is going to be king, and while we're at it, let's go harass the armies of the enemies of Israel. I think it is a manifestation. They know who they are, they know who he is, and they know their purpose, even though it's in sort of a seed form. In 1 Samuel 22, Saul kills the priests. Not only the priest who gave him bread, but his whole family, all the priests. He goes and kills all the priests in vengeance. Write vengeful on there too. Oh, not right anymore. In vengeance. So he's gone from trying to please the Lord with his random ideas of what might be good to destroying the priests of God because they fed the new anointed king. Which is to show that progression of making choices and how the choices spiral, either up or down. So we're getting a picture that Jonathan is very faithful, he's very humble, he's given away essentially his birthright because he knows it's not his anymore. And he loves the chosen of the Lord, so he's going to support him. In 1 Samuel 23:16, Jonathan sees David for the last time. Then Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the woods and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, "Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel. I shall be next to you. Even my father Saul knows that." So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed in the woods, and Jonathan went to his own house. Okay, so let's skip to the end. For Jonathan, 1 Samuel 31. I think, when I started reading it, I was like, I know these stories. But then it occurred to me as I'm reading through it, I don't really remember what happened to Jonathan. I'm aware that he is such a close friend and supporter of David. And then I know he's not around anymore. In 1 Samuel 31, right before it, David has just had victory over the Amalekites, the ones that Saul would not utterly destroy earlier. David has had victory. His band in the wilderness is doing mighty works for God. He's got so much plunder from those battles that he's passing it on to other people to feed them. And then in 31, now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Melchishua, Saul's sons. The battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it, and there's the end of Saul and Jonathan and his brothers. And I hit that, and I was like, why? I mean, I got upset with God. I'm like, Jonathan was this faithful friend to David. Why is he dying here? And he took me backwards through the story. And Jonathan, the last thing he says to David is, "I know you're king over Israel, and I'm going to be by your side when you're king over Israel." And David stays in the woods and he goes back to his own house. He goes back to the house of Saul. And I'm struck by, why didn't he go out into the wilderness with David? If he believed in his heart that David was the king, why didn't he go out with him into the wilderness? And if he had, David was being given victory by the Lord out there in the wilderness. Saul, still in this dead remnant of kingship, is facing enemies he can't deal with. And the Lord used that for us to say, to really put it in our hearts. That the kingdom comes by faith, and the Lord sets it up that way. And when we're talking about his return and the end times, and when we're just talking about stepping out in healing, and we're talking about stepping out in prophecy, he's saying, if you're going to wait for it to be established, it's too late at that point. You can't be Jonathan going, when you're king, when I see you standing in the city, with the royal robe on, being acclaimed by all Israel, then I'll be there then. At that point, it's too late. It goes along with Genesis 7, 1 through 24, which I'm not going to read. It's the lead up to going into the ark. And Noah's been building for a long time. But at some point in the not too distant past, I was reading through it. And God says, come into the ark. And for the first time, it really stuck out to me that they hang out in the ark for 7 days before it starts raining. Which I can't imagine spending all of that time building that boat and then having the Lord say, come on inside. And what they did sitting there in the darkness with those animals for 7 days and no rain. I mean, it must have been hard. I know a lot of people talk about it must have been hard building that boat in faith. But I can't imagine those last 7 days. And it kind of ties into, suddenly everything, boom, boom, boom. It ties into the feasts Stephanie was talking about. Everywhere but in Jerusalem. So the feasts start when the new moon is identified, but from Jerusalem. And if you're not in Jerusalem, you can't tell, right? You can have astronomical charts and you can make a really good guess at when the new moon is in Jerusalem. But because it actually has to be seen, they give a cushion. So if outside of Jerusalem, these days there's 2 days. Let's celebrate it twice, just to be sure we got the right day. And I always thought of that as like the height of legalism and silly. And but Stephanie was going, actually, there's something in that. There's like this sort of wiggle room that actually God moves in. Which is to say, when God says something's going to happen, and we get to the point where it's supposed to happen, there might be 7 more days of wiggle room in there. And are we going to go, you know what, I don't see it. I must have been wrong. Let's go home. Victoria's laughing because she's like, I know exactly what those 11 days are. Which goes to, where is your faith? Where is your hope? Why are you here? Is it because you see something and you know something? And how long is that going to last before it's, you know what, it's not established yet? We have to know that we have a call, and we have to know that call lasts until it gets established, not until we thought it was going to be established, and then, you know, oh, I must have missed it. It's time to, you know, wrap it up. With all of the sense of the time growing short, it's not even necessary that I know that he's going to come back, in a year or 5 years or a decade. Because everybody throughout history, unless you go really far back to some of the people who lived for incredibly long times, but the vast majority of people have only had about 80 years to get ready. Some far fewer, some a little bit more, but really a brief time. I'm looking around and seeing teenagers in the room, but by the time you get to about 40, you realize how crazily short life is. And you realize how fast the last 40 years went, and that you've got probably about 40 years left in a natural lifespan, and how the time is short for every single person, whether they lived 1,500 years ago or they live now. And you realize that the time is short in the sense that the people who wrote this book under the power of the Holy Spirit knew the time was short. And it was, and what that activated in them. And they knew the time was short, and it's 2,000 years later. So that means the time's got to be a lot shorter for us. So close. When I was talking about earlier, speaking out into the air, just that there is a time where it's done. There is a time when the kingdom's established and it's too late to get on board. Because that is not a prevailing thing being said in the world. Even inside the church. And it takes faith to get there. Which is also to say, not just looking for the thing to be established, not just looking for, the Lord's return, not just looking for, I'm waiting for the miracles to move before I step into pursuing healing, till I step into pursuing radical giving. I'm going to wait until I see the provision flowing supernaturally. It's also looking around at everybody else and waiting for somebody else to step out. Should I pick on teenagers more? Is it going to provoke you guys to? It's something I remember from being a teenager, is that constantly going, okay, is anybody, okay, it's safe to do this thing, because but the rest of us, and we still do it all through our lives. It's just very dramatic when you're a teenager, how everybody's constantly kind of going, okay, this is cool. Or, ooh, that wasn't cool, I'm backing off of that real quick, because I just got the signal from my group that was not cool. And as I said earlier, there are things that we all know, but people aren't saying, because we're all waiting to go, is somebody else going to say this thing? That lesson's been hit me really hard recently. It was amazing. Was it a year and a half ago or something like that? It seemed like everywhere Steph and I were going, somebody was studying Revelation in the church. It's like we'd go to Panera and there'd be like little Revelation study groups going on, and we'd listen and we'd go, should we jump in and tell them? And then there's like signs all over town of people inviting people to, do you know what the beast is? And it was just like there's this moment where you're like, all the church is like yearning for this, and yet there's not a lot of just saying it out. Luke 13:24. Strive to enter through the narrow gate, for many, I say to you, will seek to enter and will not be able. when once the master of the house has risen up and shut the door. And you begin to stand outside and knock at the door, saying, Lord, Lord, open for us. And he will answer and say to you, I do not know you, where you are from. Then you will begin to say, we ate and drank in your presence, and you taught in our streets. But he'll say, I tell you, I don't know you, where you're from. Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth when you see Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, and yourselves thrust out. Then they will come from the east and the west, from the north and south, and sit down in the kingdom of God. And indeed, there are last who will be first, and there are first who will be last. Which kind of hits all through the story of Saul and Jonathan. First, there is a point where it's done. Master shuts the door. And then the turning over of that structure. You know, he did it with the Jews and went, the Gentiles are going to come in first. You guys should have come in first, but the Gentiles are going to come in first. And then you guys are going to come in first. Not individually, but as a group. And then in Matthew 7:21, to bring it right back to the Sermon on the Mount. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, done many wonders in your name? And then I'll declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Which goes right back to Saul going, well, but I'm going to give you sacrifices, God. I'm going to do things for you that are wonderful. But it's not the relationship, which is the primary thing. But listen to me, and I'll tell you, what's going to please me. And I got hit when Stephanie was talking about the Day of Atonement wrap up with that closing of that gate, the Nyla service at the end. On every day, there are 3 prescribed prayers for Israel, except for feast days, there's 4. And then the Day of Atonement on Yom Kippur is the only day that has 5, and the last one is the Nyla, which is the closing of the gate. The ark is opened the whole time during Yom Kippur. It's sort of symbolic of that connection with Yah and being able to pray and come draw close to him. And then in the last service, there's this idea of the gate being closed. The end of the day, the books of life is sealed and done. And it traditionally has a very sort of fear of the Lord. Get inside quick. You don't want to miss out. But it also has another side, which is the invitation that inside here, once the gate's shut, you're now in with the king, in the enclosed garden with him. It's a beautiful place of intimacy. And, which is not in any tradition that I found, I was hearing him talk to me about, there's also a promise in that that Jesus keeps saying, hold on a little while longer, and you will overcome. When the gate's shut, it means there's a place of rest now, of not being afraid anymore, that you might wander back out of it. It shuts out, but it also shuts in, and it seals. Our names are sealed. Those who persevere, their names are sealed. So, not to put too fine a point on get in, exercise faith while it's still possible to exercise faith, because there is a time when it's done, but also as an invitation to the beauty of getting in and being sealed in when that gate is shut. So, it was kind of exhausting. I thought you were kidding about talking for an hour and a half. I really didn't think it was going to go that long. So let's transition into praying for the next 25 minutes. Along these lines, whatever the Lord's put into your heart while I've been talking at you and reading at you.